This offseason, the Carolina Panthers have gone through a much-needed offensive overhaul. On today's show, let's look back at all the changes made and ahead to what this offense could look like in 2024 right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, the part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm right here on the show answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. Best way to get those into me is by either adding me or DMing me on Twitter at Julian Council. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Boy, what a interesting, exciting offseason it has been for the Carolina Panthers as they've gone over a coaching staff change. They've gone through a new general manager being here. We've gone through the draft and free agency. And now we're going to take some time to look at all the changes that have been made, but starting off on the offensive side of the ball for the Panthers. Last year was abysmal. 2-15, the worst offense in the NFL by many metrics and by all respects of a lot of people out there who just watch this team. The Panthers needed to go through a complete teardown of the offense and find a way to just be competent, if not more than that, in 2024. And all started with the head coaching hire and who they were going to select. At no point in time did I ever believe that Panthers owner David Tepper would not hire an offensive head coach. Him interviewing defensive coaches like Ejiro Evero, the Panthers' current DC and DC last year, I never felt like he truly had an opportunity to get this job. And none of the defensive coaches out there had an opportunity to get a job here in Carolina. That's been the trend across the NFL, getting the young, hot offensive coach. And that's where the Carolina Panthers landed in hiring Dave Canales, coming off of back-to-back very impressive seasons, first working as the quarterback coach in Seattle, where he spent over a decade under Pete Carroll, working with Geno Smith, who has been resurrected and has now been paid as the top quarterback out there in Seattle with the Seahawks. Baker Mayfield last year, we saw what he did in Carolina, really what he did not do. He looked like one of the best players last season in the NFC at the quarterback position as he was able to help the Buccaneers get to the divisional round before losing to Detroit, all thanks to what Dave Canales was able to do with him. To see the careers of Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, what those two guys have gone through, and how Baker has shown promise at certain times, but he's also played for the Browns, for the Panthers, for the Rams, now the Bucks, 4 different teams for the number 1 overall pick, and he's not that far removed from being the number 1 overall pick. He gets paid this offseason because of what he was able to do under Dave Canales. The hope is that Dave Canales can do for what he did for Geno and for Baker for Bryce Young here in Carolina. It's not just getting Bryce to play competent, but really high-level football. It's also getting Bryce paid, because what that means is the Carolina Panthers were right in giving up all they gave up to get up to number 1 last year to select Bryce Young as their franchise quarterback. If Dave Canales is able to coach him and get out of him what he got out of Geno Smith and out of Baker Mayfield the past 2 seasons, Bryce Young will end up playing like a franchise quarterback and being paid like a franchise quarterback. And I think his deal is going to be a lot larger than the deals that Baker and Geno have signed the last couple of off seasons because of the investment the Panthers initially put into bringing Bryce Young to Carolina, but also with his youth and his time in the organization, and hopefully Dave Canales sticking around as his head coach. It wasn't just Dave Canales who came over here to Carolina. He brought over an offensive coaching staff that was completely rebuilt as well. Last year, we sat here throughout the offseason, whether it was me on Locked On Panthers, you just having conversations with your family and your friends and talk about how they had this all-star coaching staff. Hell yeah, you got Frank Reich coming over here. He has a Super Bowl ring. Got Deuce Staley, who has a Super Bowl ring. He's coming over here to Carolina. Josh McCown, he's back here working with quarterbacks for the first time, but still, he's not that far removed from actually playing the position in the NFL. Everyone is excited about what this team could look like. Thomas Brown, he was someone who one day could be a head coach. That's what the thought was last year, and I'm sure that thought exists somewhere out here in this NFL ecosystem, but it was an all-star coaching staff. That's what everyone thought we had here in Carolina last year, and that turned out to be anything but the case. As what played out last year was one of the worst offenses in franchise history, one of the worst offenses, if not the worst, in the NFL last season, and a 2-15 record. Frank Reich gone after 11 games, and many of those staff members falling out the door in the weeks and month to come there as the Panthers closed out that 2023 season. Now, Dave Canales brings over a coaching staff with pretty good accolades as well, but also a background to him dating back to his time in Seattle, starting off with his OC, Brad Idzik, who played wide receiver locally at Wake Forest. He spent last year in Tampa as a wide receiver coach. 4 years prior to that, he was in Seattle with Dave Canales. He's his right-hand man, and he now takes over as the OC. He will not call plays. That will be Dave Canales, but he will be a large part of the game plan as he grows and develops into the OC role. And hopefully, if the Panthers have success, he grows and develops into someone who's going to be a head coaching candidate down the line. That is a good problem to have for the Carolina Panthers. The good thing is you have an offensive head coach who can call plays, so you don't have to worry about losing your play caller. But make no mistake, if Brad Idzik is able to be a head coaching candidate, that would hopefully look like a big loss for the Panthers as this team grows into, my hope is, an NFC South and NFC championship contender. Also brought over Harold Goodwin, who came from Tampa Bay. He has 2 Super Bowl rings working with the offensive lines in Pittsburgh and down there in Tampa. He's the assistant head coach and the running game coordinator. Massive to get someone who has Super Bowl rings, obviously, but has worked with offensive lines, knowing that was a major weakness for the Panthers last year. Pass game coordinator Nate Carroll, the son of Pete Carroll, he comes over to Carolina from Seattle as his father is retired. Quarterback coach Will Harriger last year was in Dallas. Go back to 2022. He was in USC, the Southern Cal version of USC, working with Caleb Williams during his Heisman Trophy season. Now he's going to work with a former Heisman Trophy winner in Bryce Young in Carolina, and he used to be an assistant quarterback coach in Seattle working with Russell Wilson. Wide receiver coach Rob Moore comes over from Tennessee. Had some pretty bad wide receiver units talent-wise the last couple of seasons, but he did help groom A.J. Brown, who's now one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Pat McPherson spent his entirety of his career in Seattle under Pete Carroll. The last 13 years, he comes over to Carolina as a tight end coach. Bernie Parmalee, running backs coach, was last in Jacksonville. He's now here. Joe Gilbert, offensive line coach in Tampa, followed Goodwin here to Carolina to work under Canales. And then assistant offensive line coach Keely Kuikwa, I don't know how to say his last name, was the assistant offensive line coach last year or the last couple seasons in Seattle. And now he comes over to Carolina. Looking at the coaching staff offensively, Idzik, Harriger, Carroll, McPherson, and the guy's last name I cannot pronounce, are all coaches who worked alongside Dave Canales with the Seahawks. Last season, you look at the coaching staff that was put together here. Frank Reich did not want to just go and get guys that had worked with them before. He wanted to have a mix of coaches that have been in other philosophies, other offenses, and try to meld all that together. And what we saw was a bunch of infighting and what was dubbed as a Game of Thrones, not Game of Thrones, kind of like Game of Thrones, but a Hunger Games culture and mentality within that building on 800 South Mint Street in Uptown Charlotte. Now you got guys who worked with Canales last year and followed him from Tampa, and people who have worked with him back in the past in Seattle, and 2 others and more and Parmalee that likely were just had connections to other guys on the coaching staff, but not guys who have worked with Canales before. This is a coaching staff that heavily has a background having worked with Dave Canales in the past, whether it be in Seattle or Tampa Bay. And that is a good thing, especially looking back at what the Panthers coaching staff went through last year under Frank Reich. Well-intentioned to get different personalities, different mentalities in the building. It just did not work out on paper and also on the field. Also, one thing that really sticks out to me, knowing how poor the offensive line and wide receivers were, really wide receivers, the Panthers have a number of coaches with a background working with wide receivers. Dave Canales played wide receiver in college. He coached wide receivers in Seattle. Brad Idzik played in college, coached wide receivers last year and back in Seattle. Nate Carroll, same case, coached wide receivers in Seattle. Of course, Rob Moore, who's the wide receiver coach, has worked with wide receivers. That's 4 coaches on this offensive coaching staff working with a position group that was the worst in the NFL last year. And now some of the additions that we've seen made over the last month or so should really be able to raise that talent level and groom some of these young guys that we have not seen make plays. And that the hope has been that these former second rounders will be able to make plays. Now we can see what this coaching staff with a pretty heavy wide receiver and O-line background is able to do with 2 units that struggled mightily offensively for the Carolina Panthers last year. So the rebuild had to start with the coaching staff, but you got to acquire talent. If you don't have the dudes to do it, you're not going to have a chance to win on Sundays. Let's look at some of the additions the Panthers made this offseason, free agency, trade-wise, and, of course, the draft on Locked On Panthers here in just a moment. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. And for folks here in North Carolina, we do have a playoff team in our great state. It's not a team that plays here in Charlotte. It's a team that plays in Raleigh. The Hurricanes are into the second round, the semifinals of the Eastern Conference there for Lord Stanley's Cup. You also got the NBA playoffs going on, so bet on all of that. And whether you win or lose, $150. Who can hate that? Bet on everything from slap shots, home runs, slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Seriously. We've had betting since March 11th. Why haven't you signed up? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Obviously, who was going to coach the Panthers was a key question and something that's important to this organization. But for me, the coach is important, yes, but who are the players? We saw Bill Belichick create an outstanding culture and franchise the last 20 years in New England. But as soon as Tom Brady left, they weren't the same Patriots. It's about the X's and O's, but also the Jimmies and Joes, and the Carolina Panthers needed to find some Jimmies, needed to find some Joes, and really needed to find some dogs, according to Dan Morgan, as he took over as the Panthers assistant general manager and president of football operations. Love what Dave Canales can provide to Carolina. Love what he did with Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith. But you got to know whether you have the right guy at quarterback anyways. And the hope is that with Dave Canales coming in here and some of the additions that have been made, that we'll finally get to see the real Bryce Young, which I don't think is who we saw for the most part last season. I think he is who we saw against the Packers. We saw that at least he's capable of doing that. Now, can we do it on a weekly basis or more often than not? That is to be determined. And the hope is with the additions of Dave Canales coming over here, we'll see that kind of player. The Panthers overall just lack talent offensively last year. The wide receivers could not get open. We saw what DJ Chark was not able to do. Did make some outstanding catches in some of those games against Houston and Atlanta, but we had games like Jacksonville. We had games like Tampa Bay in that season, the last game he ever played as a Carolina Panther. And the reason why he's still out there on the market, he just was not up to snuff for this team. You saw Jonathan Mingo struggle as a rookie, and you got to provide him some grace, certainly. And I'm someone who should preach, practice what I preach. And when I say that, but the Panthers offense just lack talent. And if you don't have talent, especially at this level of football, you're just not going to have success at all. But also, if your offensive line is not healthy, you don't have a chance in hell. And the Panthers knew going to this offseason, they had to be aggressive in finding an offensive line. We talked about this back in January and February. How much of an offensive line overhaul could this team really have? Ike Ekwonu was going to come back, whether it be at tackle or at guard. He was going to be on the roster. Taylor Moton, the cap hit that he had was significant, but the Panthers really didn't have much recourse to cut him there, knowing that it would leave a massive void at right tackle. And this was in the greatest tackle market, free agency-wise, in the NFL. Center, Bradley Bozeman was under contract. Were you going to let him go after 2 seasons and just re-signing him a year prior? Austin Corbett was coming back again. He didn't have much recourse of his contract either as far as trying to get out of that. Brady Christensen was a solid starter for you in 22. He was injured last season. He was at the end of his rookie deal. All 5 of the projected starting linemen last season were coming back. And all 5 of the guys that really helped this team turn things around offensively with a ground and pound running style under Steve Wilkes, they were still going to be on the roster as far as contract-wise. So I wondered how much the Panthers really were going to do and could do to rebuild this offensive line. Well, it became very clear on day one of free agency, a little bit later than some fans were willing to wait. As soon as free agency opened, Panther fans an hour into it, like, why haven't we made any move? What's going on? Patience, because the big move did come as the Panthers signed Robert Hunt, Miami Dolphins guard, to a 5-year, $100 million contract with $63 million guaranteed. Then later that evening, they signed left guard from Seattle, Damian Lewis, a 4-year, $53 million deal with $26.2 million guaranteed, $89.2 million in fully guaranteed money to the left guard and right guard spots on the offensive line day one of free agency. I'll let you know right then and there, Panthers were not messing around. And it's very possible that they overpaid Hunt and Lewis, two guys who have not been Pro Bowlers. Taylor Moton's never been a Pro Bowler, but he's also been healthy. He's on an Ironman streak, knock on wood, and he has been a solid player for them. Health is important, but also competency is important. You don't have to be excellent, just be competent at this point in time and stay on the field. And that is what Taylor Moton has been. He has been a good player. He's not been a great player. He does not need to be a Pro Bowler. Keep doing what you're doing. If you could find 5 of those guys, you'd have a good offensive line. You may not have an offensive line littered with Pro Bowlers and all pros, but my thought is if the Panthers didn't stink all these years, maybe more people would pay attention to what Taylor Moton did. Think back to the 15-1 season, all the Pro Bowl talent that the Panthers had. And probably a large part had to do with, yes, it being an excellent football team, but also you're good. People are watching. They're paying attention. When you're bad, it's difficult to get on the Pro Bowl list. Look at Derek Brown. He only got to the Pro Bowl because he was a reserve, even though he deserved it based off of his play, his NFL record-setting play on the defensive line. If you don't win games, people don't pay attention. I know it's their job and all that, but they don't. And the players who are deserving don't get the accolades that they deserve. So I'm thinking that the Panthers, with this rebuilt offensive line, with Ike Ekwonu staying at left tackle, Robert Hunt, Damian Lewis coming in at left guard, Austin Corbett sliding over to center, and Taylor Moton at right tackle, if they win games this year, they stay together and they stay healthy and win games down in the future as well, it's possible that maybe 1 or 2 or few will end up being Pro Bowlers or all pros, because that's what happens when you have a winning team and a healthy offensive line. But overpaying, if you want to look at it that way, it's not going to matter if they stay healthy and they do their job of keeping Bryce Young upright and opening up some big holes, as Dave Canales has stated multiple times, that they're going to be stubborn about running the football and that running backs matter here in Carolina. Some trades Panthers made this offseason. The big one was Deontay Johnson right there, first week of free agency. They traded Dante Jackson. The team had planned on cutting, whether they could either get a trade or cut him. They were going to cut him, let him go. He was not going to be on the roster in 2024. They traded Dante and a 6th-round pick for Deontay Johnson and got back in exchange a 7th-round pick, which they used later on Michael Barrett, the linebacker out of Michigan. Arguably the biggest move of Dan Morgan's early tenure as a GM, to basically trade a 6th-round pick for a starting wide receiver in Deontay Johnson, who is an elite separator, something the Panthers did not have on a roster last year, to add another playmaker and a former Pro Bowler as a receiver and an all-pro as a returner to the arsenal, with Adam Thielen coming back as well, and then some of the younger guys that were returning, and of course who they added through the draft. This was an immediate help for Bryce Young and something I want to see the Panthers do. I want to see the Panthers be aggressive and try to get T. Higgins, which is, I guess, still on the table, but they have not done that. It does not look like that's going to be something that happens, which is totally fine. They needed to add someone who's a veteran. It couldn't just be, let's go draft a rookie wide receiver and then depend on that guy to be a stud. No, go get someone who's proven it out on the field before, and Deontay Johnson has proven it on the field. I'm not concerned about his attitude, because they've already told him, you're going to be our extra wide receiver. You're going to be the first read. As long as he's getting the football, he's going to be happy. If he's not getting the football and the quarterback plays bad like it was in Pittsburgh, yeah, he's going to be upset, rightfully so, because this is a contract year for Deontay Johnson. So he wants his money. And if the quarterback plays bad, he's not getting the football, hard to get his money. I'm not concerned about him. But it didn't have to stop just there. with the offensive line and wide receiver play in free agency, the Panthers still need to add more weapons heading into the draft. I wanted to see them get a wide receiver. I wanted to see them get a tight end, and they did that for me and for you and for them and Bryce Young last weekend, I guess 2 weekends ago now, during the NFL draft. Xavier Legette, they traded pick 33 to 32 for Buffalo. They also traded their sixth-round pick, their fifth-round pick for a sixth-round pick. Basically, that's what they did. They traded fifth for a sixth to get up to 32 to get Xavier Legette and the fifth-year option. Legette would have been the pick at 33. If the Panthers had not done that, the Bills would have taken Keon Coleman out of Florida State. First 4 years for Legette, we talked about it last week, did nothing at South Carolina, 42 receptions, 423 yards, 5 touchdowns. Last year blew up, 71 receptions, 1,255 yards, 7 touchdowns. And a lot of his early struggles had to do with the constant change as far as head coach goes, his coach on the wide receiver staff, position rather. Looking at the quarterback play at South Carolina, lost his parents as well, and had some injuries. So plus a bunch of things that slowed him down his first 4 years rather at South Carolina. The hope is now Legette can come in, instantly be an impact player. The Panthers then later on traded up to get Jonathan Brooks after trading back, getting a second-round pick for next year, which was excellent to be able to do that. They traded for a running back. Didn't necessarily love the idea of getting a running back early, but to get the best running back on the board, you got to like that part of it. And Jonathan Brooks is coming off an ACL tear, but before he tore his ACL last year at Texas, he was excellent. 1,139 rushing yards, 6.1 yards per carry, 10 touchdowns. Also was a good receiver, 25 receptions, 286 yards and a touchdown. He brings the versatility that Dave Canales believes in must have with the running back in his offense. Jonathan Brooks, to me, immediately becomes RB1 in Carolina once he is cleared and healthy. And then Ja'Tavion Sanders, they get a tight end. In my opinion, the second best tight end in college football last year. And had he come back to Texas and then enter the draft next year, likely the first tight end off the board. But Brock Bowers existed. And this is a guy who he was behind Brock Bowers. I don't know how far behind. He's certainly far behind. I'm not going to sit here and say he wasn't far behind Brock Bowers, but he was a really good player the last 2 years at Texas. 99 receptions, 1,295 yards, 7 touchdowns. Tied 18th in college football in 2023 in yards after the catch, something the Panthers receivers did not do last year, 7.7 yards after the catch. He was second among FBS tight ends, only behind Brock Bowers with 12 catches of 20-plus yards in 2023. So he's behind Brock Bowers, but to me, he was the second best tight end in this draft class. I know Ben Sinnott from Kansas State went ahead of him, maybe because he's a better blocker. That's something that Ja'Tavion Sanders will have to work on. But as far as being a playmaker, he can instantly be that at the tight end position, something the Panthers have not had since Greg Olsen. Jonathan Brooks comes in. He is going to be your RB1. And then you got Xavier Legette, who can fill in as your third wide receiver with the two veterans, Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen. The Panthers attacked the offensive line. They brought in playmakers during free agency and the draft, all the things that we wanted to see them do this offseason. So the question now is, how much better will the offense be? We'll find out. We'll talk about it here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. We've all been there either as a player or as a fan. It's halftime. The scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists and take as much of my friend's money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's a Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards. Compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. Charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there. Put on your game face and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Well, the Panthers offense can't be any worse than they were last year, right? They have to be better, you would think. Looking back at some of the numbers offensively a season ago, and they are horrific, as we all know. In 2023, the Panthers were 30th in offensive EPA, that's expected points added. They were 30th in passing offense EPA, 22nd in rushing offense EPA, and 31st in offensive DVOA. Considering all the additions, I do not expect this team to be in the bottom of the NFL in all of those categories heading into 2024. And look at this. If nothing else, strengthening the offensive line should make this team far more competitive than it was a year ago. They should be able to run the football. When you add all that beef when it comes to Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt in the middle and move Austin Corbett there to the center spot where he was arguably your best offensive lineman in 2022 when he was healthy. It was either him or Moton. Those two guys on the right side, they were steady. And the Panthers ran the damn ball in the second half of that season under Steve Wilkes. You should expect them with Dave Canales saying everything about how they're going to be stubborn about running the football and how running backs matter all of a sudden here. Well, they mattered last year when they signed Miles Sanders, but running backs mattering. Expect them to run the ball a lot and to be able to have success running the football and really be able to control the line of scrimmage. And that's going to take pressure off of your quarterback. So last year, 22nd in rushing offense EPA. This team, I don't know if they're going to be top 10, but they're going to be in the top half of the NFL when it comes to running the football in 2024. You can take that one to the bank. You can go ahead and bet on it. If you want to bet on them being a top 10 rushing offense, go ahead and do it, because I really think they have that potential with this offensive line coming back and being healthy. Fingers crossed. That needs to be what happens. They need to be healthy. And if they're healthy with Icky, who we know it can be a road grader on the outside at left tackle, then to have Damian Lewis next to him, Corbett hopefully can stay healthy with him there at center, Hunt, Moton. Man, it could be fun to see what Jonathan Brooks and Chuba Hubbard, and if Miles Sanders is still sticking around, what those three could do. But really, the top two, Hubbard and Brooks, what they're able to do behind that offensive line, that team should be able to run the football this year. Like, this is a team that should be able to have a ton of success on the ground and take pressure off of Bryce Young. And when you're able to run the ball, and I'm thinking they're going to probably be in under center more often than they were last year, where things were very predictable in that shotgun offense because they have a small quarterback, that's going to open up the possibility to the play action. And I think Bryce Young could be one of the best play action quarterbacks in football this year based off of how well I think they can run the ball this season and the ability of guys like Deontay Johnson to get open, Adam Thielen doing his thing, and then you're going to have the potential deep ball, big play threat of Xavier Legette there on the outside as well. That could be scary for a lot of teams where you could see the Panthers breaking up big chunk yardage and all of a sudden, all right, play action, going deep. There's Legette winning a 50-50 ball, making it into an 80-20 ball like he did last year at South Carolina. Like, there's going to be still questions, though, about the wide receiver core, because outside of Johnson and outside of Thielen, I suppose I have a question about every single one of them. Like Deontay Johnson, he's not in Pittsburgh anymore. His numbers went down. I think a big reason of that was because of the quarterback play. Is that the case, or is it Deontay Johnson not holding up his end of the bargain? He's struggled in the past with drops. It's been a number of seasons. I think it's been like 3 or 4 seasons since that really was an issue, but maybe that creeps back up. There's a question there. Just the only question is he going to live up and be the guy that he's shown in the past to be and be a good teammate and all of that? If he gets to football and produces, I don't think there's any questions about him being a good teammate. After losing games, is that going to impact him? And is he going to lash out? We'll see. So there can be a question about Deontay Johnson. Adam Thielen's going to be 34. I brought this up a number of times now. I don't expect him, based off of Johnson being here, to put up the numbers he put up last year, but also based off of him being older, I don't expect him to put up the numbers he put up last season. But how much of a drop-off will there be from what we saw from Thielen in 23 to what we're going to see in Thielen in 24 at the age of 34? Then everybody else, serious questions. Legette, love the size, the speed, the everything about what he looks like physically and what he was able to do last year at South Carolina. You can't erase the first 4 years of his career at South Carolina. And yes, all the reasons that we went over could have and probably certainly did factor into why he did not produce. But it's 1 year of college production now coming to the NFL. And when talking about DK Metcalf, he had 2 years of fine production in a very deep passing offense there at Ole Miss. And he's come out and he's been really good as the guy in Seattle. Last year, Legette was the guy, and he's not going to be the guy this year in Carolina, but he's going to be a key cog of this passing offense. What is he able to provide to them, and can he be consistent and really be a breakout performer continuing on as an NFL player? Terrace Marshall, we've seen it for a period of time, but really that's the only time we saw it. Will he even be on the roster? Will he get an opportunity? That's all TBD. Mingo, they basically already got his replacement, and we'll see how he responds to that. And if he's able to find a way to separate, catch the football when it's thrown to him, and make plays. all things that he struggled with last year, and quite honestly, didn't really do at Ole Miss playing in the SEC. So there are questions about this offense. Running the ball, that's not a question to me. The offensive line play, being able to protect, being able to road grade, that is not a question to me at all. The passing game is still a question. There are players who are going to allow Bryce Young to have a shot, which he did not have last year because the offensive line was poor and banged up, and also his receivers could not separate, and his running backs weren't great either. Now, with Chuba and Brooks, I think he's got a solid running back tandem. I like what they have on the outside as far as the potential there. Even though it's young, unproven potential like Sanders and, of course, Leggett and Mingo as well. And you can even throw Terrace Marshall, but you have two veterans, which is important. But the offensive line, it's a line of scrimmage game. I say that to y'all all the time. If you cannot win up front, you cannot win a game. And the Panthers can win up front on offense. And that in itself will give them an opportunity to be much better than that they were last season. Now, will they be top half of the NFL in passing and overall offense? I don't know, but I do think they will be when it comes to running offense, and that's going to be really able to set the table for everything else they want to do offensively. If they're another team like they were last year that could not run the football, had to depend on the pass game, I don't know if they're going to be as successful because there's still questions about Ike Ekwonu and his protection. And Moton and those other guys are only getting older. So we'll see how they play out, but I do expect this to be a much better offense that we saw last year because they could not be worse, and there's not just going to be a minimal change. When you fix the O-line, that is going to be a big step in the right direction for the Carolina Panthers in 2024, and I cannot wait to see what Bryce Young looks like with an actual offensive line, a real running game, and some guys on the outside that can get open. Should be fun, should definitely be way better than everything we saw last year as this team continues to build and hopefully contend down the road in the NFC South and in the NFC as a whole. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe and follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays, throughout the offseason, I'm here on the show answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me on Twitter at Julian Council to get those questions into me now. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole as always and forever. Keep pounding, and I'll talk to y'all on Tuesday.